So audience participation time. And no, I'm not going to ask you what can go through the green glass door, all right? So is there anyone else willing to admit that they had no idea what Nathan was talking about, right? So praise Jesus for Jen Davis. Praise Jesus for Jen, who had the courage to speak out into existence what was going on. Because I'm sitting there going, it's not fair that Todd and Anna Mixon, Courtney's parents, get to go through the green glass door, but Courtney Mixon doesn't get to go through. And how in the world does Courtney, after being married, get to go through the green glass door? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Please stop this game. It's not fair. It's not right. And it's really not fair and right because I can't figure it out. So that's not what we're going to do. Audience participation time, this is for our grandparents and parents, all right? So I want you to raise your hand if you can affirm what I'm about to ask you, okay? So here goes. Who here, raise your hand, if you taught your kids to go potty? There we go. Beautiful. All right. Who here taught your kids how to tie their shoes? Awesome. Amazing. All right. Who here taught your kids how to read a story? Right? Awesome. All right. These next two are the most important. Who here taught your kids how to steal? We'll have to meet afterwards, Barry, to talk about that, right? And even more importantly, who here taught your kids how to lie? So if nobody taught them these things, how come every kid that I've ever known, before they get to kindergarten, before they really start going out in the world, has figured out how to steal and how to lie? So with that question simmering in your heads, this week is the beginning of a new series. It is a new series that we're using a play on the word algorithm, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But mostly this series is focused on our hearts. And our heart's not simply that amazing organ that pumps oxygenated blood to the very ends of our body, that is the thing that keeps us alive and moving through this world. But instead, we're going to focus on the biblical understanding of the word heart. And all throughout the Bible, there are lots of understandings of what the Bible thinks our heart is all about. And I'm just going to share a few of them. The truth is, we could be here all day if I referenced all the times that we see the word heart referenced to in Scripture. In Genesis 6, the Lord makes an unbelievably challenging and difficult call after he acknowledges this, that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. And in comparison, in 1 Samuel, Hannah is praying in her heart and says, "My heart rejoices in the Lord." The heart is referred to a lot in the Psalms. We hear these words, "My heart trusts in God. My heart leaps for joy. Your law is within my heart. God is the strength of my heart." But also, "How long will I have sorrow in my heart? My heart has turned to wax. I groan in anguish of heart." Same with Proverbs, as we hear this dichotomy, right? Hope deferred makes the heart sick, and yet, in contrast, a heart at peace gives life to the body. That, y'all, is a message in and of itself, right? In Jeremiah 17, we hear these warnings. "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord." And then we hear that the heart is devious above all else, that in fact it is perverse. But then at the beginning of the church that we have captured in the book of Acts, in Acts 4, we hear that the believers were of one heart and one mind, and it caused them to share everything that they owned, and there was not a needy person among them. So, which is it? Is our heart filled with hope and peace and joy? Is it the place where somehow goodness and truth reside? Or is it the place where awfulness and evil and anguish and sorrow and all sorts of things that quite frankly could be evil, is that where they reside? So you've already probably begun to form a thought or an opinion on this, but to continue to have you think this through, we're going to take a moment and focus on the writings that King Solomon gave to us in the book of Ecclesiastes. In just a moment, I'm going to read from Ecclesiastes chapter 2. If you can see, it's kind of a third-ish away through the Bible, reading from the second chapter, right? But to set this up, it's important that you know King Solomon was the son of King David. And during the reign of King Solomon, the nation of Israel was at its height. They were at their height of being the most powerful, most influential, most sort of status-driven that they've probably ever been. They had great influence in all of their territory, and they were sort of past that point where other people would come and take them over. That would come back again. But at this moment in time, they were a force. And to say it like King Solomon was the man. He had unbelievable wisdom. He had unparalleled loyalty, like his folks and people loved him. He had unbelievable status and influence. If you read through the stories that we hear of him in the book of Kings, like he had great influence over neighboring countries and powers. He was the man, and he had piles and piles and piles of money, right? So he could have had anything that he wanted ever. No questions. He didn't have to think, well, I'm going to have to go get a loan to get that. He could get it. And yet, even though he had access to everything, what we have in the book of Ecclesiastes, most of us believe, is some writings and thoughts from him, ruminations about his life, about what was awesome about it, but also how you can't have everything in the world, but that doesn't always bring you peace. And so here's where I want to read from Ecclesiastes 2, beginning at verse 9. So hear now these words of Solomon. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Maybe he needed to do a little work on his pride, okay? Also my wisdom remained with me. And he says this is the key verse. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Solomon had long seasons in his life where he pursued what he wanted or what his heart wanted. And what we know is that included wealth and it included women. Solomon had tons of wealth and he had tons of women. Now that would lead to some of his downfall with the Lord. But he pursued everything that his heart desired, and yet here we go, and it turns the page a little bit here, and we're going to check in with one part later in Ecclesiastes. But now verse 11. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had spent in doing it, and again, all was vanity and a chasing after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Solomon had everything, and yet to reflect on his life, he came to discover, which we think was this book that turned into his writings. It might have even been his journal. Who really knows? But he had everything, and yet towards the end of his life, he reflected that simply following the desires of his heart didn't in fact lead to peace and hope and joy. That in fact later on in the book, he states clearly, like, my heart is filled with despair and anxiety. And y'all, he had everything, and he could pursue anything that he wanted. So I'm going to bring all this together with this statement. The heart is where we find ourselves. The good of us, but also the bad of us. It is the best of us. It is the worst of us. It is the place where good, right, morality exists. Like there have been people, maybe even people that you know, that have grown up in unimaginably difficult circumstances where maybe they had parents that weren't good and effective at being parents at all, that still found somehow a way through that, and they turned out to be good, amazing, wonderful people. Like somehow, some way, they avoided all of the junk of their upbringing and are just these amazing people. Now that's unfortunately the exception, but it still happens. And yet we also know the reverse is true. If I were to find out what your worst fear is, what the worst possible circumstance that you could imagine, and then somehow found a way to put you into that circumstance, and if I were to do it to myself, I'm fairly sure I know what would happen. The worst within me would come out. And I would go into something like survival mode, and I would take my morality and put it over here on a shelf while I pursued maybe what I felt like I had to do just to survive. Within each of us is the capacity to do unimaginable good and awesome, wonderful things to the world and to others and to ourselves. But also within each and every single one of us, and you need to hear me, it doesn't matter how long you've known Jesus. It doesn't matter when you said yes to him, if you meant that with your whole heart or not, until we cross over into the life that's promised to us by faith in him, there will always be within us awfulness. And all it takes is the right moment, the right circumstance for it to come out, and before you know it, we are saying things that are awful and terrible and tragic and filled with hurt and evil, and we're doing things that we would never want anyone else to know about. It is all within each of us. And so the answer to the question of who taught our kids to lie and steal is that they taught themselves. Or a different way to think about it is this. In Genesis 3, we have this understanding that at the very beginning, when God was trying to have an amazing, grace-filled, blessed relational connectivity to us, his most precious creation ever, he told us, don't do this. And of course, what do? Granted, we had some help that guided us that way. But at that moment in time, I believe that was a cosmic moment where the knowledge of good and evil was placed within each of us. So it's just there. It is there, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be discovered, and then it's up to us to choose how we're going to go forward with this. But here's what we know, especially those of us that have been around for a long time. We know that even though we've said yes to Jesus, even though we are trying our best to follow him with everything that we have, that it's still there. Like Paul talks about, that sin still remains. Now, it doesn't have to rain, but it still remains. And this tension that we have is this tension between knowing what we should do that's good and right and true, and yet still feeling sometimes this overwhelming compulsion to do what we already know is not good. And that's the tension that we hear Paul talk about in Romans chapter 7. So now I'm sort of at the back quarter of the Bible. This is the section that some monk a really long time ago labeled as the inner conflict. I'm just going to read Romans 7, verses 18 and 19, that says this: "For I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is, in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it." Y'all, Paul is talking about himself. Right? This is someone who had that Damascus Road experience with Christ, where Christ came and just quite frankly knocked him on his tail so that he would begin to believe who he was and be a force for good. And by this point in time, he has been walking with the Lord, talking about Jesus to lots of people, trying to help them find their way to that truth. And he says in verse 19, "For I do not do the good that I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do." And this brings us to our current society and our current world, where we have adopted slogans that for many of us have almost become our own version of the Bible, right? I imagine that you've heard some version of these. Follow your heart and listen when it speaks to you. Follow your heart, for it knows the way. Follow your heart, and all your dreams will come true. What I hope that we have discovered this morning is this truth: we cannot trust our heart. We cannot fully trust our heart. We cannot trust our heart. There are times when our heart guides us in ways that are awesome, amazing, and wonderful, but there are absolutely times when our heart guides us in ways that are not helpful for anything related to living out our lives as if our relationship with Jesus mattered more than anything. Y'all, and sometimes it's just simply what leads us to a place of great distraction, right? And to make matters worse, the Lord has chosen to place all of us, right? Please know it was the Lord and the Lord alone who chose to put the essence of who you are in this body that came together because of your parents, right? But the Lord chose to place us in this day and age. And that means that we're supposed to figure it out. But He chose to place us in this day and age where we have really smart marketing people who have gotten together with really smart computer programming people and created these amazing things called algorithms. And what algorithms are designed to do is take the things that you show an interest in, take the things that you seem to have a passion for, dare I say, take the things that you say your heart desires, and it wants to take you on this journey of going down this deep, dark rabbit hole of just staying connected somehow into the things that you say that you care about. And I'm simply going to give you one example of this. So, if I had nothing but money, which I don't have nothing but money, and if I had a place to put this car, I would love to own a 1980s version of Porsche 911 SC. I had a friend in high school whose dad went through a midlife crisis. He bought one of these. It was black and it was a convertible. It was the same thing. And I went out to ride it on more than one occasion. And I think the statute of limitations has run out. So I'm going to speak this truth into existence. My friend let me drive that car for something like 5 or 10 minutes. And oh my word. I had been in fast cars, right? I had lots of friends who had souped up their Mustangs, and I love y'all who love American cars. American cars back then did great going fast in a straight line. This car went fast around a corner, like crazy fast. And not fast where you felt like you were losing control, fast like you are strapped in a roller coaster going 100 miles an hour, and it feels awesome. And so in preparing to talk to you, right, I Googled to find just the right picture to put up on the screen. Well, guess what happened the next time I went into Facebook? Porsche all over the place, right? And so, because I have nothing but time to do and I wasn't working on a message or anything like that, right, I decided to click on one of the ads that told me that had someone who was selling one of these, right? Because I'm like, okay, I don't have the money and I don't have the space, but I wonder how much they cost, right? How much do you think an in good condition with low mileage one of those cars costs? Take a guess. 40 to 50,000. Maybe Barry's done the same search. Yeah, right. Very nice, right? And once again, then I spent the next, 15 minutes just living in this la-la fantasy land of, oh my gosh, look at that. And oh, look what this guy did with his. And oh, look, there's one for sale. And it's only in Tennessee. Like, that's really close, right? Like, you could really just drive up there right now and you could get it. But you don't have the money, but you could get the money, right? Even though it's for something else, you could use it for this and it'd be great, right? And so 20 minutes later, I'm all of a sudden like, wait a second, I have a message that I need to finish writing, so maybe I should stop doing this and write it. Is there anything evil about Porsches? I don't think so. Maybe one of you have discovered it, and if you can get with me later, right? There's nothing evil about it. And yet, I had a moment where I allowed my heart to pull me in a direction that if I didn't have any guardrails, right, I'd be all about. And maybe that's not your thing. Maybe having a vintage car is not your thing, right? But if I sat down with each of you over a cup of coffee or over lunch, I'd begin to discover the things that you truly care about. And in and of themselves, they're probably not bad things, right? Like, what about following our favorite sports teams? Have you ever noticed how quickly those Facebook discussions around sports teams go south in an awful way? And before you know it, people are acting like we're talking about life and death when we're talking about a game. If that doesn't do it for you, then how about your hobby? How much time do you spend digging into what is the best gear to really do well at my hobby? Or even, how can I look amazing when I go out to do my favorite hobby? And before you know it, 30 minutes is gone and you've done nothing but go down into this deep, dark dive of things that aren't really the most important things to you. And y'all, this is just talking about the things within us that in and of themselves are kind of innocent and good, right? How about the things that are in ourselves that are definitely not good? What about lust? What about those moments where we get pulled into this place where we are searching for our desire or what we think is the most attractive version of the person that we're not in a committed, lifelong marriage relationship with, and before you know it, like we have convinced ourselves that somehow this is the person that we wish we were with. Even though we don't even know this person, and all it is just this pure attractional thing. I'm not looking for you to raise your hand, right? But you know what I'm talking about. We spend time searching and desiring people who we are not in a committed, healthy love relationship with, right? What about envy? How often do we innocently look at someone's kitchen or someone's home or even just how they present their lifestyle and think to ourselves, man, I would be better, my life would be better if I had that or if I lived like them. And it's like we aren't even considering that they're only presenting a part of their lives that they choose to present. There is no person, no matter what they have, that doesn't have to deal with sadness and grief and anger and hurt and loss. But we can present this beautiful picture. Or how about this? How about the echo chambers that we all get pulled into? We might have a really strong belief or stance on this really important thing, and we start searching for it, and before you know, we get pulled down into this echo chamber filled with people who think like us, who believe like us, and before you know it, we are thinking awful, terrible, tragic things about people who don't believe the same way. And y'all, we all do it. All of us. And we get lost here. We get really lost here because before you know it, we get pulled into this place where we are focused on the aspects of ourselves that are not good, that are not helpful. Jesus didn't come here to sow into our hearts lust and envy and hate and distrust and division. He didn't. And so when we get lost in these things, filled with envy, then we respond to the real people in our world in a way that isn't always helpful. The message today isn't that we're going to come up with any answers. Really would love for y'all to come back and join us as we spend time uncovering what those answers might be. What we're hoping to get you to begin to think about is the reality that you cannot trust your heart if it's not guided by someone or something that is beyond you. Because if you do, there's a great chance that you are not going to be in a good place. It will change how you think of yourself. It will change how you love yourself. It will absolutely change and affect how you care and love for people, and especially the people who aren't always easy to care and love. But today is a word or an opportunity to give you a word of encouragement or even challenge. When you leave here, if you so desire, I think we have enough for one per family. This is what we went over at Ash Wednesday. This past Wednesday was Ash Wednesday. I'm not trying to convert anybody to Catholicism, okay? So this also isn't just for those of you who grew up being Catholic. Lent is a season that existed way before the Catholic Church that was a season of preparation for people who were finally ready to get baptized. And over time, the larger church decided, you know what, hey, that's a really cool thing that they're doing. We've already been baptized, but we'd like to be a part of that. It is a season for you to prayerfully consider letting go of things, and I'm trying to continue to encourage you, let go of more than coffee and chocolate. Let go, maybe, of spending time in things that don't help you follow the Lord well. And maybe that's social media. Who knows what it is? Only you know. but it's a season to let go of things that do not help us stay connected to the Lord. And then we fill that space that we've let go of, whatever that is, with time in prayer, time in the Word, time listening to podcasts that are filling us with hope and grace and truth. But it's up to you to pray about it and get with the Lord. And once again, I'm not telling you to become Catholic. I'm just inviting you into a season where you might experience the possibility of feasting on the stuff of His world because you're letting go or fasting of the stuff in this world.